Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate the Bar Council and Tindak Malaysia for organizing this forum. And thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be a part of this very noble cause. Brothers and sisters, I've been asked to speak on an independent election commission, or EC for short. Before we can evaluate whether the EC is independent or not, we have to have a certain kind of worldview as to how do we look at the EC and put the EC in the context of the needs of current and contemporary society and democratic values or democratization process. We are now living in a new world, and I would like to use a term which is new realities to reflect on the meaning of the new world. Within the new realities, there are two components. One is the international or universal component. And there are three elements of the new realities in this context. Firstly, the advent of the ICT and the new media. Secondly, the emergence of a new social consciousness and a new social movement. And thirdly, we are already moving into, in fact, we are already within the third phase of democracy. These three elements, which is universal, is changing the way people look at politics, democracy, elections, democratic institutions, and so on and so forth. Within the Malaysian context, the new realities are represented by another three major elements. Firstly, people are becoming more educated, and they have an educated opinion on elections, on democracy, on politics. Secondly, the urban factor is becoming more important. And thirdly, the growing and very strong middle class. All six elements, three which is universal, three which is local, when you put them together, they complement each other and they produce what I call the new middle ground, a grouping of people, of individuals who are by definition non-partisan. They are not political party card-carrying members. They are independent, and they are represented, for instance, by the young university students, the academia, the professionals, the technocrats, entrepreneurs, and civil society activists. There was a time when the middle ground was quite small in terms of its composition related to the numbers of the electorate. But in the last GE13, the Malaysian middle ground is about 30% of the electorate. And this is the biggest in the history of Malaysian election, and it is going to grow even bigger. Before GE12 and GE13, without the ICT and new media, or the advent of the ICT and the new media as we understand it today, the middle ground consists of individuals who do not necessarily know each other or were in contact with each other. But starting with the GE12 and GE13, the Malaysian new middle ground are actually people who know each other, they are contacting each other, they share, especially on the social media platform, and by the time they go to the ballot box, they already have some kind of an accumulated thought. So they have decided, perhaps a few days or a few weeks before the ballot day, whom to vote. And they are not simply voting based on likes and dislikes, but a big number of them, or a big percentage of them, are voting with a certain educated opinion or conscience, and they are very sure what they meant by voting for A or for B, and so on and so forth. So in the context of the new realities, what is the position of the Election Commission? If it is in the context of the old realities, I don't think we have any problem, because probably on the one hand the EC have been doing a good job. On the other hand, the people may not really understand the kind of democracy that they are looking for, that they believe in, that they want to fight for, and also they probably don't really understand the works of the Election Commission. Now, hence we are faced with a kind of dynamism here. Who is dynamic? Is the EC dynamic? Are the people dynamic? Or to put it another way, who is more dynamic? Who is leading the dynamism? In short, when we talk in the context of democratization process, if we are discussing the issue of making our democracy more mature and more progressive, who is more dynamic, the EC or the people? Now, brothers and sisters, let us look at our current EC. We know for a fact that the Election Commission of Malaysia is a commission set up for the purpose of regulating and conducting elections. The commission is formed under Article 114 of the Federal Constitution, which empowers it to conduct elections for the Dewan Rakyat and the state legislative bodies. The three main functions of the current EC are as follows. Firstly, to review and redelineate boundaries of parliamentary and state constituencies after a lapse of not less than 8 years from the date of the last review of redelineation. Secondly, to undertake the registration of electors and the review of the electoral roll. And finally, to conduct general election to the House of Representatives and the state legislative assemblies and by-elections in the event of vacancy. Now, if we were to assess the position and the role of the EC thus far by looking at the Bersih 8 demands, then one would wonder if the EC is doing a good job and if the EC is really independent. After a long struggle, finally the Parliament decided to establish a parliamentary select committee, and out of the 8 demands by Bersih, it was translated into 22 specific items, 18 of which was approved by consensus by the PSC, which was to a certain extent bipartisan, while 4 were rejected by my colleagues from Pakatan Rakyat who were members of the PSC. The question now is, out of the 4 that was rejected, what is the situation? Is the EC looking at it at all, or simply because it has been rejected or it has not been approved by consensus, therefore you just throw it out? Next, out of the 18 elements that was approved by consensus, what is the percentage of implementation? Is the percentage majority, or is the percentage very small? What about the EC's credibility in terms of the usage and the buying of the indelible ink in the last GE13? In this context, my take is that the EC more often than not were not very proactive, were very defensive, and in most instances sound like they represent the government rather than they are actually independent. I had the opportunity to watch, for instance, a live debate right before me between the Deputy Chairman of the EC and Dato Ambiga, organized by Sina Harian. Another speaker was Professor Shamsul Amri. And as a member of the BN, I thought, why is the Deputy Chairman in more than one occasion during the forum seems to be defending the government when they shouldn't be defending anyone but their own credibility if it is at stake? Now, the other question is, if we were to go into another level, bringing democratization process in the country to another level, and this is important because the result of the GE13 showed that the people wants democracy to be brought to a higher level. What about new politics? What about bipartisan politics? What about automatic registration of voters? What about bringing down the qualifying age of voting from 21 today to 18? And there are a host of other issues. The EC has either been quiet or defensive, but for a fact, they have never been passionate and they have never been proactive. Brothers and sisters, the biggest project before us is the coming delineation process of our constituencies. The standard operating procedure of the EC, and this is of course within certain laws that are legitimate, the EC will start by announcing that we are now starting the process. And the process will take about or not more than 2 years. The point I want to make here is this. The people want to have a consultation with the EC in the whole process, beginning, if possible, before the EC announcing. Because when the EC announced that the process has started, chances is the EC have got the drawings ready. It could be 222 parliamentary seats, it could be more, but the drawings could have been ready by the time the EC announced that we are starting the whole process. It is of utmost importance that we make a loud and clear demand that we want a consultation with the EC before the process starts. I am made to understand, for instance, that Tindak Malaysia and Bersih have got their own they have their own drawing, they have their own principles. And talking about principle, this is something that should be the prerequisite before we even discuss the drawing of the constituency. Numbers of seats should come number 2. The first thing that should come before the drawing is to agree on certain principles to avoid the 2 major problems with our system, i.e. malapportionment and gerrymandering. So we must be consciously clear that we are going into the consultation, and during the consultation we can agree on certain principles first before we start talking about the numbers of seats to be allocated at the federal and at the state level. The second point that must come out from this forum is that we need to educate the public, the electorates, on the importance of this process, the process of delineation. Within the context of the EC system, there will be a time allocated, about a month, where people will be invited to review and even to protest on the drawing presented by the EC. The question is, are we prepared to have a minimum of 100 electorates from every constitution to participate in the process of reviewing and protest of the drawing presented by the EC? So I think it is of utmost importance that this forum discuss ways and means to educate the public, to ensure that in every constituencies there will be 100 people minimum to come to the consultation with the EC during the process. Finally, brothers and sisters, the independent EC should be looked at within the context of new realities, not old realities. If it is in the context of the old reality, probably the EC have done a good job. But in the context of the new realities, I think the EC is not passionate enough. We all understand that democracy means, among others, government of the people, for the people, by the people. The EC should subscribe fully and should not in any way allow itself to be perceived as the EC that is of the people, OFF, for the people, FORCE, by the people, BUI. Thank you.